662-8421. So I have a lot of pictures to show you because I like talking in pictures. I'm from Europe originally, from Germany, and from Canada, but I've been in Santa Cruz since 1997. And I want to tell you about a new medicine. You're part of a new generation. You're going to be changed by the technologies that have been developed that you're living in. Some of you will be very much affected by what is developing now. And I want to talk to you about a field called complementary and alternative medicine, or CAM, which is new, of which energy medicine is one of the subsections. So that's my talk. I'm going to talk about how this developed a little bit, how the body's biomagnetic field works, and how we use these energy medicine modalities, including light, sound, and diagnostic modalities, as a new way to, in the future, create healthcare. And I mean really healthcare, because the current system we have is essentially disease care. I want to show you a couple of statistics about the United States. In the United States, this is what we spend on defense. $682 billion in 2012, rather, which is about $2,150 for every man, woman, and child in America. That's the highest in the world. As a whole, the world spends $1,725,000,000 on defense. That's the same as the Canadian national economy, which is the 14th largest in the world. But look at what we spend on healthcare in America. $2,600,000,000, which is $8,150 for every man, woman, and child, the highest in the world. This is our disease care system, ladies and gentlemen, as it exists. And that needs to be changed, because it's going to change in the future. There won't be enough money to go around. That's why there's 46 million Americans don't have any health insurance. Now, I work in nutritional medicine and alternative medicine. I just wanted to show you how it stacks up against the pharmaceutical interest. This is an older slide, but it's still relevant. In 2002, prescription drugs were a part at that time that we were only spending $1 trillion on healthcare. It's gone up about double since then. We spent $162 billion on pharmaceutical drugs, of which $21 billion was just an increase from the year before. That increase of $21 billion is much larger as the whole supplement industry, that's vitamins, sports drinks, herbs, minerals, etc. So you can see every year the pharmaceutical expenditure is much larger than what we spend in alternative, you might say, health promotion. Now, the science of mind-body medicine was covered in Newsweek and other things. This is part of what we call complementary and alternative medicine. So biologically based practices, as herbs and other biological things, are part of this. Mind-body medicine is part of that. Manipulative body-based therapy like chiropractic, osteopathy, and so forth are part of that. Massage. And energy medicine, which I'm going to talk about, is there. And then there's whole medical systems like Ayurvedic systems from India, traditional Chinese medicine, and so on. This is all what we call CAM, or complementary and alternative medicine. The spending on that is really relatively small for research. The National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, which is part of the National Institutes of Health, which is the research arm of the government in healthcare. The spending here in 2006 was $123 million out of a $25 billion research budget for regular medicine. That's drugs, pharmaceutical, surgeries, and so on. I just want to put that in perspective, how small this field still is. So what is energy? Energy is the capacity to do work and how to affect change on any level. Now, most of the physicists among you will look at that and say, okay, we can measure that. That's a term that came in about the 1850s and so on. The whole concept of energy is often connected with thermodynamics and other things. But there's also subtle energy, as I'll show you, the energy to affect things through consciousness. the effect of intention, the effect of emotional management, all of that is around. In 1987, there was a conference in India, in Madras, and this book, Energy Medicine Around the World, described some of the technologies at that time. Out of that, new books that came about, like my friend James Oshman wrote a book, Energy Medicine, The Scientific Basis, in 2000, which really underlined what many of the manipulative therapies and alternative therapies being used by practitioners all over the world had their scientific basis, with lots of peer-reviewed literature. There's organizations like the International Society for the Study of Cell Energy and Energy Medicine, of which I was the late president. Our organization called the Dove Health Alliance. I work with the German groups because I'm from Europe originally, called the German Society for Energetic and Informational Medicine, and so on. So at the basis, we're electromagnetic beings. And this man, Cyril Smith, from England, is a very interesting researcher from the University of Salford. He wrote this book because he started seeing more and more people getting sick on electromagnetic fields that are in the environment that I'll cover briefly. We are now living in a sea of microwaves. All of you are affected by that, whether you wake up or not. Relaxed, refreshed has a lot to do with your exercise, with your nutrition, and your environmental exposure. Many of you live in fields of, say, Wi-Fi, wireless radiation, which are microwaves. You have a pulsing smart meter, which is a microwave device on the side of your house. You use cordless phones and cell phones, and I'll show you some of the impacts of that has on your physiology. Something that you want to be aware of, because these are technologies I didn't grow up with, but your generation does. So I want to say a couple of things briefly about electromagnetism. Electromagnetism is foundational to everything that you experience. There's four forces, the strong and the weak force in the atom, and radioactivity and so on, the weak force. And then there is gravitational force, and everything else is electromagnetism. And it's really the strongest force that you deal with every day. Everything is based on electromagnetism. And the people who developed this were Faraday, who first discovered that, and then James Clerk Maxwell, who wrote the first field theory in 1865 on that. And then once vector analysis came about, and this chap, this electrician from England called Heaviside, he simplified these very complex equations to make them useful for technologists. But in the process, he eliminated something called the potential fields, or what's called the A field. I just want you to remember that term. The B field is the magnetic field, also called sometimes the H field. And then the A field is actually called the magnetic vector potential field. And this has been eliminated. As a result of that, some of our technologies don't look at the biological impacts of electromagnetic radiation because they don't consider the A field. You consider that in quantum physics, but we don't look at that very much in regular physics. And a way to describe that is to say, many of you remember this from basic physics courses, if you have a current flowing through a wire, and this is a coil, then in a wire, the magnetic field, spreads out like circular ripples like that. But if you have a coil, then the A field spreads out like that, if you have a solenoid, because the magnetic field is trapped within the windings, so it's sort of inside the windings, and then it spills out at the end, so it looks kind of like the Earth's field, like a donut. But the magnetic vector potential field looks like that. And once we start putting that in, we get a whole new physics. This is called, and I don't need you to know the details, but normal physics, which is what most of the engineers talked about and physicists talked about, is based on Maxwell's laws, and we call that a Maxwell equation, or the U1 gauge symmetry. And there are higher symmetries you can develop, called SU2 symmetries, which are higher gauge symmetries when you amend Maxwell's equations to incorporate magnetic vector potential. I just want you to know that there's a different way of looking at things, that it can explain many of the things that involve the technologies I'm going to show you that we use in the alternative medicine field. So, for those of you who are physicists, you don't have to remember any of that, but what you want to see here is that this A field you see as magnetic vector potential is incorporated in those expanded electromagnetic equations. They're not in standard Maxwell's equations, as you can see on the left. So, what the implications of this is that if you have an A field, you can actually program water to contain information, and we know that water can influence your physiology. For example, many people now that I see have certain sicknesses. They're electromagnetically sick, they don't function well, they don't know why, and the water that they drink has been influenced by electromagnetic fields in their environment and has an impact. Consciousness can actually impact water and restructure it. And that restructured water, when you drink it, has a different effect on your physiology. And this is something totally new. This is not something that chemists and physicists generally talk about. So we come to this idea that we are made of fields and waves. This is a picture by Alex Gray, a friend and an artist who shows the energy centers inside the body called chakras. He has meridians, the Chinese acupuncture meridians. You can see here, this looks like these white lines. Then of course you superimpose that on the anatomy and so on. So you start to develop a picture of a subtle anatomy of the human body. And then there is a sort of an artistic conception that we are connected to the earth below and the sky or the energy above. That's more figuratively. But there's actually correlations, as I've showed you, with electromagnetism. So we have these different sheaths around the body that we interact with. And I'll show you that in some other pictures later. But according to quantum physics, basically we're emptiness, right? We're all emptiness. This is what's in Tibetan Buddhism and consciousness too. We're essentially emptiness, and quantum physics tells us that 0.001% is solid and everything else is space. And that space is filled with energy. Space is filled with virtual